Good morning, Vienna. We are Vienna. I want to continue to talk to you in the very last sermon series we have of the year. I will preach again next week, and then only one more time this year, because we will be launching into our December of Christmas. We'll be celebrating the youth in the church. We'll be celebrating the school. We'll be celebrating community service through our incarnational Sabbath, which I'll talk about in a minute again. And then again in December, we'll have, in the last week, thanks to Pastor Coasley, we'll have a cantata come up from Harrisonburg. Remember that last year? Yeah, it was a blessing, so you want to make sure you're here for that. I want to talk, though, about what we've been talking about in this last sermon series. My sermon today is called Hope in the Waiting, and it's a part of our series called Forever with Jesus, because we've been talking all year long about beating with the heartbeat of Jesus, keeping our heart going with Jesus. And it's not enough that our heart beat with Jesus today. We want to make sure that our heart keeps beating with Jesus tomorrow. We want to make sure that our heart doesn't just beat with Jesus in 2025. We want to make sure that our heart beats with Jesus in 2026 and 2027. Hopefully he comes. We want to keep our heart beating with Jesus until he comes, right? We never want our hearts to be out of beat with Jesus. So we have to keep doing the things that make our heart beat with Jesus. And yet, there's this other thing we face called stress. There's this other thing we face called life. There's this other thing we face called problems. There's this other thing we face called anxiety disorders. There's this other thing we face called bills. Some of us don't face them, and it makes it even more to the anxiety disorder later. The thing is, we are seeking to beat with the heart, to beat with the heartbeat of Jesus every day, every year. But the thing is, there are things that come and interrupt our heartbeat rhythm. And what do we do about those things? How is it that we beat with the heartbeat of Jesus while at the same time dealing with the reality of a messy, fallen world? I mean, this week, I got a call from a friend, and she was saying that, she was out doing grocery shopping. She was trying to get everything ready for the coming holidays. Thanksgiving's coming up, and she's trying to get everything ready, and she's putting things in her cart, and her kid was yelling and screaming, and, she's embarrassed in the grocery store, like, my kid is misbehaving, and what am I going to do? And will there be enough money in my account when I get up there to buy the groceries? And she said she's going through all these feelings, and she's trying to figure out how she's going to get through to the end of the week, and how she's going to make things go. And you know what happened to her? Her cell phone began to ring. She picked up her cell phone, and it was her bank. And her bank says to her, "We've detected fraudulent activity on your account. We need to secure your account, and it cannot wait. We're going to need you to confirm your social security number." The kid is crying, the cashier say, "Come on, there's people behind you." You know what happened? By the way, free information, not in the Bible, but also true. If anyone calls you from any financial institution and asks you to confirm anything, say, "Thank you very much. I will hang up and call you right back." And then you call a verified number that you know who's on the other end. Luckily, as soon as she went through the checkout, she realized, what did I just do? And quickly called the bank and had her own stuff frozen. for real. Now, it will take time to sort out, and now she's stressed out, like, how am I going to get ready for the holidays? I was in the middle of getting ready, but now I have to take time off work. I got to go in, because, once you have a fraud account like that, they got to make sure they're talking to the right person. You guys actually go in now with ID and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, we can be going so well for so long, and things can just be, we can feel like we're at the top of our game. And it only takes one comment. It only takes one mistake. It only takes one moment for us to wonder, where is the pulse of Jesus in my life? Have you ever wondered where the pulse of Jesus is in your life? Because we are all living under stress. Let me tell you, Black Friday is coming. Don't get trampled out there. And I'm here to give you the bad news. Or is it good news? It's 33 days today until Christmas. 33 days until Christmas. Now, Christmas is a mixed bag for many people. That's why we celebrate Christmas right in this church. And we're going to keep celebrating Christmas right in this church. Because if there's one thing I know in this world, if there's one thing I know people need in this world, it's a little bit more joy. But for many people, Christmas is a mixed bag. Will I have enough to go where I need to go for Christmas? Will I have enough to get what I need to get for someone for Christmas? And for some, it will be, can I even have a Christmas? Because this year, the person that I really do Christmas for is no longer with us. And so these major holidays are a blessing and a curse, and they're what you make out of them. But the point is, even things that are meant to bring joy in your life can bring complications. And it is a mature Christian that has something we call, in emotional intelligence, we call it self-awareness. A mature Christian is not waiting for their yearly physical to find out if their heart is beating right. I went and had my yearly physical this week. All good news. But if you wait to check your spiritual heart once a year, you could be in trouble. Because the truth is, there's so many things that just derail the regular rhythm of the spiritual heart. Do you know the pulse of your own faith? Are you self-reflecting on the pulse of your own faith? Is church just this thing I come to once a week or once a month? Some of you, not going out who. Is this thing just something that I check on? When was the last time you took your pulse? When was the last time you checked your spiritual blood pressure? Because things, even good things, also bring with them stressors that can derail you. And so I want you to think about that with me today. Because this is what Paul is addressing in Thessalonica, to the Thessalonians. By the way, that epistle is probably the first New Testament epistle. That epistle was probably written before any of the four Gospels. And it's one of the first ones, if you remember the story in Acts where it talks about how this epistle came about, it came about under duress, under stress. Paul was doing a missionary journey there, and what had happened is the people there didn't like what he's got to say. And I have some experience of what happens when people don't like what you got to say. And so they didn't like what Paul had to say, and so they chased Paul out of town. But they didn't just chase Paul out of town. They broke into Jason's house, beat Jason up, threw him in jail. Jason was a young deacon in the church. Threw him in jail, and we're rounding up the rest of the churches in Thessalonica. And so Paul decided, I better get out of there because I'm just bringing persecution upon them. And then he went over to Berea. And you remember the story in Berea, and because they liked Paul in Berea. But in Berea, Paul was impressed with them because he said they're more noble than the Thessalonians because they checked with the Bible to see everything he said. The Christians in Thessalonica were very young Christians. It wasn't established like in Berea. They didn't have a big Jewish background in that city. It was a port city. It was a Greek city. And so all the believers that Paul had made there were new believers, and they didn't have their faith completed. And that's the reason we have 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians, is because Paul is writing back to them to give them in sermon format. Paul is writing back to them to give them in written format what he could not finish teaching while he was there. And one of the problems they have there is Paul was not able to finish his presentation of the gospel, and they don't know what to do with suffering. And they maybe misunderstood Paul, maybe we misunderstood Paul, maybe Paul didn't finish what he was saying, I don't know, but they're under the impression that Jesus is coming back immediately. So they were willing to be persecuted a little bit. They were willing to go through persecution because they knew that Jesus was going to come back soon. And so they start coming unglued when they face persecution. Because in their mind, we will have hard days, but Jesus will come and get us. Does that sound like anybody you know? We're going to have hard days, but it's okay because Jesus is going to come and get us. So Paul writes back to them in Thessalonians. He's like, hey, guys, calm down. First, the man of perdition's got to come. He hasn't even come yet. A whole lot of things have to happen first. They haven't even happened yet. And so this is perplexing to them because they just thought they were going to go through a couple rough Mondays and then be on permanent vacation with Jesus. But then the unthinkable happened. Leaders and elders and deacons and Sabbath school teachers in the church got persecuted to the point of death and died. And that young church's faith was shaken to the core. They are like, we don't get it. We thought Jesus loved us. We thought that this message of Christianity was going to bring us all this joy. We were so excited because of the way Paul preached. We didn't know it was going to get our father and our uncle and our cousin killed. And it's kind of like Christmas. The gospel brings us joy. The gospel brings us peace that passes all understanding. But the gospel does not inoculate us against suffering. God doesn't take us out of suffering, but he does go through the suffering with us. So the Thessalonians, they're like, we don't get it. We like this good stuff we heard about a paradise that was coming. We like this good stuff we heard about a God who could even like Greco-Romans. We like this good stuff we heard about, that there is a God that forgives sins, and we have sins, and so we're so glad that God forgives sins, but we don't get why. Jason's door was broken down, and he was imprisoned and beaten, and Paul had escaped under the fence to Berea. We don't get why we are suffering if God is so good. And so Paul begins to write to them, and Paul begins to say, hey, listen, brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed. And the King James is a little more blunt, ignorant. The NIV cleaned it up to make it a little bit more polite. In church, we do not want you to be uninformed. We do not want you to not understand the truth about the glorious coming of Jesus Christ. Church, we do not want you to be uninformed and misunderstand what we mean when we talk about the return of Jesus being imminent. Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who what? What's the word? Sleep. I was having a Bible study about that this week. Be uninformed about those who what? Asleep in what? What does he mean? Dead. And in this case, persecuted to death. We do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of what? The rest of who? Now, who have what? Hope in the waiting is the name of this sermon. How do I hold hope when others are holding hate? How do I hold hope when others just hold hostility? How do I hold hope when the heat around me feels like hell? Do I hold hope like the rest of the world? Now, I write these things so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind. We're going to do a little bit of exegesis here. This is digging apart the language a little bit. I write this so that you do not grieve like the rest of who? Mankind. Does this mean we don't grieve? Does this mean we don't grieve? We grieve. And I'm here to tell you, Jesus is coming, and that is the blessed hope, and that is the hope in the waiting. But if you thought that was your one-way ticket out of grief, Paul probably ran out of your church before you got the end of the sermon. We will grieve, but we are called to a particular kind of grief. We will grieve. I got to back up. If we will grieve, what does that mean? We will be given reasons to grieve. So, the famous question we like to ask when things go wrong. I'm right there with you. It's Captain Dan at the top of Forrest Gump's boat with his fist up in the air saying, "Why, God, why?" Well, this is why. because you will grieve. And grief is a normal part of a resurrected life. But Paul tells the believers in Thessalonica, there's a particular way we grieve. We don't grieve as if we have no hope. We don't grieve as if we don't know the rest of the story. We don't grieve as if the battle is over just because there will be an empty chair this year at the table. We don't grieve as those who have no what? We don't grieve as if death wins. For we know death does not win. We know what is asleep will awake. We know that the fact that the resurrection is coming. Come on. You got to follow me here. We know that the fact that the resurrection is coming. There's one person in the room who believes in the resurrection. We know that the fact that the resurrection is coming is only proof of the crucifixion. As C.S. Lewis famously said, and I've quoted to you by memory many times, nothing that does not die will ever be resurrected. So we all have our Captain Dan moment. Why, God? Because unless we grieve, we won't really know joy. Speaking of C.S. Lewis, this is one of my favorite quotes too. And if you've been through pain, you know this is true. The pain I feel now is the happiness I had before. That is the deal. That is the deal. Let that sink in. All pain is a loss of the happiness we once had. And when we wish pain away, what we are actually saying is we never wanted to be happy. C.S. Lewis wrote this famously about the death of his wife. The joy you feel now is the loss you feel later. But I'm guaranteeing you, if you feel the loss now, you wouldn't have traded it for the joy you once had. Paul goes on to unpack this idea, saying, we believe that Jesus died and did what? Rose again. And so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have what? Fallen asleep in him. And what do we say sleep was? That's why we don't grieve as if one who believes death wins. Death doesn't win. As Rob Bell famously said, controversially at that, love wins. For we believe that Jesus died. Did he die? And rose again. Was he resurrected? I will simply point you again to the logic of C.S. Lewis. You cannot be resurrected without what? Dying. We're going to go through seasons. It doesn't mean we've lost hope. It means we're waiting in the hope. There are going to be days we go through losses. It doesn't mean that hope is dying. It means that we're waiting in the hope. There are going to be days when the unthinkable happens. It doesn't mean that God can't put Humpty Dumpty together again, but we are waiting in the hope. The Christian who is spiritually mature, the Christian who beats with the heartbeat of Jesus, can tolerate dissatisfaction, can tolerate persecution, can tolerate pain, because they know about hope in the waiting. For we believe that Jesus died and was rose again. So we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have what? Fallen asleep in him. This is the hope. This is the hope. This is the hope. And if I had time, I'd go into the apologetics of this, and I'm not going to get deep into it. I'm just going to tell you that even the most hardened atheist skeptics all will agree that Jesus Christ, or they would call him Jesus of Nazareth, was a real person who was absolutely crucified under Pontius Pilate. It's considered a fixed time in historical reckoning. There are no credible universities, there are no credible scholars, other than those who self-publish on Amazon. No credible ones who would deny the life of a man called Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified under Pontius Pilate. And the leading scholar who teaches down here at UNC, Bart Ehrman, who is as anti-Christian as it can come, former Christian, you know how that goes. In his book, Did Jesus Exist?, says he knows this: Jesus existed, and as an atheist, he'll fight till the day he dies that Jesus existed, and that he was crucified, and that there's more historical evidence for that than anything else he knows of. But then he will say, I don't think he was resurrected, but I can't explain why the record shows that. The same record he points to for his existence and crucifixion. He said, what, the resurrection can't be possible. He gets into things like mass hallucination, conspiracy theory, reinventing history. But there is no logical explanation that if Jesus lived and if Jesus was crucified, why would you deny the resurrection? Why would the disciples, why would the early church, why would Thessalonica be willing to be persecuted and murdered for a myth? Paul says, put your money in the Lord's bank. Put your money in the Lord's word. According to the Lord's word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. In other words, whoever is not around your Thanksgiving table on Thursday, don't worry. The great reunion is coming. He is writing to a church who is in pain because their fathers and their uncles and their sons and their cousins have given their life for the cause of Jesus unexpectedly. And he says, listen, I know these are days you didn't plan for. I know these are days you didn't want. I know these are things that you don't know how you're going to get through, but hope is in the waiting. We have it on the Lord's word, he says, and I don't know what he's quoting, but he's probably quoting some spoken tradition about what Jesus said, because he's saying it's the Lord's word. According to the Lord's word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a what? Not that. King James even says shout. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with an appropriately mild level statement. A Sabbath appropriate proclamation. One where we are letting our vocal cords and diaphragms rest. Richard Davison, Adventist scholar at the seminary, says, the reason that a trumpet is used in this passage is a trumpet is a proclamation instrument of noise that cannot be missed. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. The dead in Christ will rise first. It makes me think that dead people listen better than live people. I like to say whenever I preach this passage, well, yes, this is licensed for pastors to get loud. But I also like to say the voice of the archangel is so loud that it even literally wakes the dead. There is hope in the waiting. There is hope in the waiting. There is hope in the waiting of the voice of the archangel. Tim Mackey, one of my favorite scholars, talks about the resurrection this way. He says, the resurrection is the redefinition of our endings. Let that sink in for a minute. The resurrection is the redefinition of our endings. What does Mackey mean? Mackey means that our endings are final because none of us can raise the dead. But what death is redefined by the trumpet of God, by the voice of the archangel, by the return of Jesus, and by the mere fact that there are two historical places in Israel where we think is the tomb of Jesus. One Protestants claim and one Catholics claim. And I don't want to get into the debate about that because I think the Catholics might be right in this case. But beside all that, I've been to both and they're both empty. Jesus won the right to redefine our death. Wherever you end, wherever someone you love ended, it did not end. There are no endings in Jesus. There are only pause. After that, he goes on to say, we who are still alive and who are left will be caught up together. And there's that unity idea. We'll be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord where? See, superheroes can fly and we're all going to get to do it. Oh, come on. Then you wanted to fly? Then you watch Christopher Reeve. Maybe you believe a man could fly. It's in the Bible. We will meet them in the air. In other words, let me put it together, because I don't think you guys are getting it. Paul is telling those people in Thessalonica who lost their uncle and their cousin and their son, God's so eager to get you all back together. He's not even waiting for heaven to reunite you. He is reuniting you even on the bus trip. He's putting you back together as fast as he can. And we will be what? With the Lord, how long? Hope is in the waiting. Hope is in the waiting. Remembering to be forever with Jesus, forever beating with the heartbeat of Jesus, is in the waiting. And I want you to think about this today. This is the core of everything I'm saying. Heaven is not primarily a place. It's a person. And New Earth is not primarily geography. It's a relationship. And that person's name is Jesus. And the new earth exists wherever, come on now, wherever the new creature stands. Come on now. The new earth exists wherever the new creature stands. If you are a new creature, then you are a walking representative of the new earth. And so I can say to you with confidence, heaven is not primarily a place, it's a person named Jesus. And I can say that the new earth is primarily not geography, but it's that relationship with Jesus. And we all right now, if you are regenerated, we all right now, if you are living in the Spirit, we all right now, if you are willing to receive the Holy Ghost into you, we all right now, if you're willing to believe that Jesus died and was resurrected for you, we all right now, if we have hope in the waiting, are representatives of that new earth. N.T. Wright calls us the final sanctuary of God, the place where the old and the new crosses over. Therefore, Paul says, encourage one another with what? These words. Let me tell you, the stupidest thing I ever hear Christians say is the things they say when people die. I'm just going to put it out there. The stupidest things I ever hear Christians say is the things they say when people die. Paul said, say these things. My advice to you, if you can't say these things, shut up. Because hope is in the waiting. You don't have to explain why. You don't have to justify God's decision. You don't have to become the defense attorney for heaven. You don't have to blame someone's dead loved one for the pain the survivors have. You don't have to suggest that God had a reason for what he's doing. You just have to encourage each other with these words. Hope is in the waiting. Yes, encourage, not judge. Yes, encourage, not contribute to stress. Yes, encourage. What Edmund Freeman calls the non-present, the non-anxious presence. just letting the Holy Spirit breathe in and out of your lungs and not needing to have every answer. Captain Dan will always raise his fist at the top of his shrimp boat. But the answer is always the same. Hope is in the waiting. One of our own church founders very distinctly and simplistically said it powerfully. The hope of the soon coming of the Lord binds hearts together in Christian love and fellowship. Let me deconstruct. If your heart is not being bound together in Christian love and fellowship, you may not have the hope of the soon coming of the Lord. The hope of the soon coming of the Lord should change you. The hope of the soon coming of the Lord should change how you feel about other people. The hope in the soon coming of the Lord, according to the servant who wrote this letter to the church, should change your affections towards others. The hope of the soon coming of the Lord, according to the servant's pen, should not just change your mind, not just change your heart, not just change your affections, it should change your behavior to one of love, charity, a non-anxious presence, the ability to stand in the soup of the mess and not get salty. Because you don't need to have the answers. It's a secret. We get into messes because we think we got to have the answers. Paul is writing the Thessalonians to say, I don't got the answer, you don't got the answer, but hope is in the waiting. And so, what are you going to do with your hope? Have you counted your hope? Have you made a list of the things you might once lose in the future to grieve? Because that's what C.S. Lewis says. Happiness is, or grief is, what we once were happy about. Are you making that list? Are you preparing yourself? Hope is in the waiting, and waiting is not inactive. Are you? Reconciling broken relationships. Now, some relationships aren't safe to reconcile, but I'm talking about relationships that are safe to reconcile, and probably relationships where you've been the problem. Are you reconciling those relationships? Because hope is in the waiting. Are you making a difference in this world? I used to have an elder in the most unhealthy church I ever pastored, and I won't tell you where that is because they could see me online. One healthy person in the church, I was glad it was the elder. He used to tell his church all the time, if you're on trial for your faith, like happened to Thessalonians, if you're on trial for your faith, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Would there be enough evidence to convict you? We're going to be talking more about upcoming things, like things happening right now, like Angel Tree. That's a hope in the waiting project. You can bring hope to a child whose parent is incarcerated simply by taking one of those tags off that tree. We're going to be talking about Incarnational Sabbath. We do it every year here. We do it on the last Sabbath before Christmas. And we have a very short service. And we all sign up. How many of us? How many? Man, that's about as loud as the trumpet of the archangel. We all sign up. And we go out and we practice incarnation. That is dwelling where hurt is. The sign-up sheet for that is out at Connection Cafe and on the screens and in your newsletters. And we will again this year open up our church on the week of Christmas, and we need your help. This only works with you guys. You have to sign up and help us. Make sandwiches. We will open up our church on Christmas week to the homeless of Fairfax County to reside here so they don't freeze to death over Christmas week. Others will take other weeks, but because we're special, we literally asked the county if we could always have the Christmas week. Because I know of no other way to celebrate the one who there was no room in the inn for by making room in the inn. Paul says this in Romans. Hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not have, we wait for it. How? Patiently, non-anxious, centered. Hope is in the waiting. When I was in my first social work job, I was working in a Christian community center, not an Adventist one. I don't know if I was an Adventist yet or not. I was almost there. I was working in a Christian community center, and one of the other workers there, her eldest son, had been a passenger in a car that was in a high-speed police chase. And he did not survive that high-speed police chase. He was raised in the church. He was raised around the community center. But whatever reason, that night, he was in, at least not the driver's seat, but in the wrong seat still. And high-speed pursuit went on. And the car turned over, and he was crushed. And that was about 5 years before I got there. And I came in on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, because in Canada, Thanksgiving is on a Monday. They're wrong. They're also a month early, because the growing season is shorter. And found her crying at her desk. I didn't know this story, but I sat with her and she told me this story. And she said, this was our 5th Thanksgiving without Junior. She said, I don't recommend this. She said, we set a spot for him at the table every Thanksgiving. But this year, Junior 2, the younger child, sat in his seat. And my husband lost it. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't set seats for people who are gone. Because we know hope is in the waiting. And you can't hurry the waiting by rubbing it in everyone's face. Hope is in the waiting. And I sat and I talked to her. And I said to her, I know I'm the new guy here. I know you've been doing social work a lot longer than me. I know you're a person of faith. Is there not a new way to honor Junior rather than setting a plate at the table? Well, it was a long way till Christmas. But when I saw her after Christmas, this is what she told me. I didn't set a seat for Junior at the table. And when my husband came in, he was angry. And he looked at me and he said, where's Junior's seat? And she said, I just got up, walked over to the Christmas tree, and plugged it in. And she said, I hadn't realized not only were we setting a plate for him and keeping ourselves trapped in dysfunction and suffering, but I had been letting his light go out. And so a new tradition was born, where instead of clinging to old pains, they plugged in new hope. They turned on the tree together. They let hope shine. Because suffering may be in the present sometimes, but hope is always in the waiting. Listen to the team and I'll be back.